Our next section focuses on another big priority for the Parsons Field Institute, and that is restoring the land. So this is comprised of a number of things. First off, fighting invasives. We have, a number of invasive plants that increase the fire risk and have other detrimental environmental effects. And we want to remove those as much as possible from the preserve. And then also in areas that have been degraded, we want to restore the preserve. You're going to hear about a number of those projects. And first up is Paul Staker and Mary Fastigi talking about fighting invasives one plant at a time. Paul Staker is our invasive plant project lead. He's been a steward for over a decade and has served since 2010. He's been a driving force with the Conservancy, even serving as our interim executive director for 9 months and serving on our board of directors. So he knows the organization inside out and the preserve like the back of his hand. He's also served as CS program chair for a couple of years, ending his term in March 2021, and he's long been engaged in our invasive plant control efforts. And he's going to tell you about our removal experimental efforts over the year. Mary Fastigi joined the Conservancy in 2019 and restoration manager. She has expanded our regional efforts in invasive plant management, furthering our engagement with the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance through Desert Defenders and with other regional partners. She works with the restoration leads and non-native plant project and invasive plant project leads, and will discuss our regional leadership in the Desert Defenders program. So welcome, Paul and Mary.
Thank you, Melanie. Unlike some of the other projects that you've heard from today, which are relatively new, as Melanie mentioned, our invasive plant project has been going on for several years. During previous Parsons Field Institute updates and symposiums, I provided quite a bit of background information about the issues related to invasive plants and our own survey, removal, monitoring efforts that we have ongoing. Last year, my presentation focused on a detailed discussion of the results from our fountain grass experimental studies. So today, my goal is to provide a relatively brief update of what we've been working on and what we've accomplished during the last year. Before getting into what we're doing, I want to briefly discuss a couple of environmental factors that influenced our work this year. As John mentioned earlier, we experienced significant monsoon rains in the summer of 2021, which differed significantly from the minimal rainfall that had occurred during the previous summer. While we generally welcome the rain, it also contributed to a very healthy crop of non-native grass this year. We specifically saw an expansion of buffalo grass into areas where it had never been seen before, and the rain seemed to negate much of the benefit from prior removal efforts. On the other hand, the spring annuals, specifically stinknet and Sahara mustard, were more prevalent than they had been the previous year, but nothing like what we had seen in the spring of 2020 when they seemed to be everywhere. On the next 3 slides, I'm going to summarize several of the lessons we have learned about how to deal with the 3 invasive plants that have been our most significant concerns. Some of these observations come from the scientific field experiments that we have conducted over the last 5 years, while others are more anecdotal based on what we've experienced from our removal efforts. There is no question that buffalo grass is the biggest problem in the preserve. As I mentioned earlier, the monsoon rains that we experienced last summer produced a very healthy crop of buffalo grass. Our field experiments on Browns Mountain have been ongoing for 5 years, and we still have not completely eradicated the grass there, despite treatments at least annually, if not more frequently. Physical removal once per year seems completely futile based on those experiments, as we counted over 200 plants in one of our 5 meter by 5 meter plots before going through the process of digging them out one more time. Herbicides seems to be more effective, with the best combination of effectiveness and efficiency seeming to come from treating the buffalo grass twice per year. assuming sufficient rainfall has occurred to cause it to green up. And our experience from extensive treatments in the field suggests it is best to spray as early as possible after the grass greens up, before it flowers if possible. We've not made a final decision about whether we will continue our buffalo grass field experiments, but we hope to eventually have sufficient results to eventually be able to publish a report on our findings. Fountain grass. We did terminate our fountain grass scientific experiments in quartz wash in 2021, as we felt that we had achieved meaningful results at that time. We have completed and submitted a manuscript for publication in a scientific journal and hope to have that published sometime shortly. As I discussed in more detail during last year's report, all treatments, whether based on physical removal or herbicide application, with variation in the number of treatments per year, seem to be effective with minimal regrowth experienced after a couple of years. Unlike buffalo grass, where I mentioned that it appears that 2 herbicide applications per year is optimal, 1 time each year was sufficient in the case of fountain grass, and obviously is more efficient in reducing the amount of labor and supplies required. This chart, which I know is a little difficult to read, shows that the trade-off between physical removal and herbicide application was dependent on the scope of the project. In general, physical removal is most effective for small projects, while herbicide application becomes more attractive as the size grows. This is due to the fixed setup costs associated with preparing for an herbicide project. Moving on to stink net. As I mentioned before, the amount of stink net that we experience each spring has been very dependent on the amount of rain that has occurred, particularly during the fall and winter seasons when the seeds germinate. Physical removal does work for stink net, although it's best to bag and remove the plants to remove any seeds from the area. But physical removal is very labor intensive, as we experienced during one field project at Pima Dynamite this year, when we had 20 stewards working for several hours to try to gather all the plants around the trailhead. So we are very interested in determining whether herbicide can be effective on stink net. Based on some small scale experiments that we did this spring and our first ever scheduled herbicide projects in the Browns Ranch trailhead area, we believe that herbicide work can be successful. But since we didn't have a major infestation this year, we do feel that we need more experience than what we were able to gather this year before truly feeling confident about what the best protocol will be. So to summarize what we've accomplished this past year, we focus almost exclusively on herbicide application based on the greater effectiveness and efficiency that we have observed. This work has largely been accomplished by our team of 5 stewards who are state certified herbicide applicators. As noted on this slide, we were out in the field 95 days during the year, spraying invasive grass, and accumulated over 1,000 labor hours on these projects. And as mentioned on the previous slide, we did have a limited number of herbicide applications on stink net as well. I want to turn briefly to a key to our future efforts to control invasives. While we have been working closely with the City of Scottsdale staff that manages the preserve for many years, meaningful steps to improve coordination between the Conservancy and the city team occurred during the past year. The steward applicators couldn't have accomplished as much as we did without the full support of the city, which provided safety training and equipment, as well as all the required herbicide supplies. We have begun to meet regularly to improve our upfront planning, including prioritizing areas where we will focus our efforts. The city was able to bring in an outside contractor in March of this year to supplement our efforts, and we believe with their work that we have now sprayed all of the buffalo grass on Browns Mountain, which has always been the area where we have the most extensive invasive population. As part of this project, the city also brought a helicopter to drop water in several locations throughout the preserve, which greatly improved the efficiency of both the contractors and our steward team by reducing the need to carry multiple gallons of water, which is used to mix with the herbicide concentrate. We are currently working with the city to submit one or more grant applications, which will hopefully help fund additional contractor and helicopter support in the future. And finally, the city has agreed to pay the cost of training and licensing several additional stewards as herbicide applicators to supplement our team. We also felt it was important to expand our education and communication efforts focused on our invasive plant issues this year. We began monthly training classes for stewards to learn more about how to identify invasives and how they can help with our efforts to manage them. This included training on an app where they could record observations when they see any of the invasive plants in the preserve, which has been extremely helpful in planning our work. We also initiated a monthly newsletter sent to almost 200 stewards who have expressed an interest in invasive plants, in which we try to educate as well as keep everyone up to date with what is happening. And as Mary will explain in more detail next, we continue to work closely with other land managers and conservation nonprofits throughout the valley to coordinate our efforts and learn from each other. To wrap up, while I believe we accomplished a lot this year, we still have a long way to go. Right now, we are actively surveying much of the south area of the preserve for invasive grant populations to gather information for one of the upcoming grant applications. We are discovering many new infested areas, so we know we have enough work to keep us busy for the foreseeable future. Our goal has been to complete first-time invasive grass removals on over 50 acres each year, and we hope to exceed that with the outside contractor assistance I've mentioned. In the next presentation, Magdil Galan Oliveras will share our collaboration with Intel to attempt to develop artificial intelligence that will assist in the survey effort through the capability to identify invasive plants from photos taken by a drone. And finally, experience clearly demonstrates that multiple removals are necessary before we can consider an area to be under control, especially with buffalo grass. Our goal is to monitor and retreat all our project areas on an annual basis. And as you can imagine, as we expand the number of projects each year, the magnitude of this effort expands exponentially. That wraps up my presentation, but before going to Q&A, I'm going to turn it over to Mary, who will expand on what is happening at the regional level.
Thank you, Paul. Paul briefly talked about how many hours his team has put into the work on the preserve, and those aren't easy hours. They're long days. They're in the heat. They're working with herbicide, and they're removing plants either manually or with chemical removal, and it's hard work. So we really thank them for that because without them, this problem would just get worse and worse each year, and they're keeping as best they can ahead of it. So in addition to the progress in removals and monitoring that we've made at the preserve, Melanie, Paul, myself, and several other stewards have been involved with the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance. Melanie briefly talked about this earlier in her welcome presentation, but CASCA for short is an organization that works to bring local organizations together to work on open space conservation. And so I've been, and so has Paul, very involved in the leadership of the Desert Defenders Program. And that program has a goal to increase mapping, removals, and monitoring of invasive species through both a shared mapping tool and educational materials. And in addition to that, we've worked this year to help draft a regional strategy that's going to guide us and our regional partners in expanding our collaborative efforts together. So to give you a little bit more detail on what happened in this past year, for the past 2 years, actually, I've served as the chair for CASCA's Invasive Plant Species Working Group. And this is a great group of people. This group brings together basically leaders in invasive plant species management from many different organizations. You can see them listed here, and I hope I didn't miss anyone, but we've got a really great group of people who are working together. And in 2021, our goal was to create a strategy to improve regional collaboration on invasive plant species issues. And so what have we accomplished to date? So we held monthly meetings where we were able to share updates and information, best management practices on a monthly basis, find out what each other were seeing out in the field so that we could get ahead of infestations such as if stinknet was coming up. And we also worked together to develop small actionable goals that could help improve our coordination on invasive plant species issues at the regional level. And so that really resulted in our 2022 regional strategy, which is now helped guiding our meetings and our actions. So we developed basically 4 cross-cutting goals focused on ensuring that the knowledge, tools, and resources that each one of our organizations have is shared. We also want to work to engage new sectors or partners like HOAs, municipalities who we haven't reached out to as frequently, potentially business parks. Like, you know, I know, for instance, John, who talked earlier, has mentioned that sometimes you go to a parking lot and you see fountain grass planted there. And so we would love to work with people who have been outside of the scope of the nonprofits and land managers we're currently working with to remove invasives that are in our neighborhoods as well as within our protected lands. We also want to increase our ability to map, remove, and monitor invasive species. That's our main goal of the Desert Defenders program, is to obviously remove these plants. And we also want to inspire people to become advocates for this work. So to help aid us, we've developed a mapping committee. Right now, Michael Babor from Arizona Game and Fish brought together data from several maps from IMAP Invasives, which is a tool to help map where invasive species are. You can also add invasives to iNaturalist on a project that's on there. And we use an app called Field Maps for the Desert Defenders program. So he took all of that together and displayed it on one prioritization map, which helps us concentrate where we want to share effort in the valley to map, remove, and educate in spaces that maybe we've missed individually in our organizations. We also had a field trip to Cave Creek Regional Park, where Juanita Armstrong from Maricopa County Parks and Recreation showed our partners what they've been doing to restore the desert and manage invasives, especially after the fire that went through Cave Creek Regional Park. And so that was very informative, and it brought all of our partners together, and we got very good feedback from that. And this photo on this slide is from that outing. And in this past February, we piloted our first jointly run Desert Defenders table at the Tres Rios Nature Festival, which happens down in Avondale. And the purpose of that was to share information that all of our organizations have on invasive plant species management with the general public. And so with these successes in mind, we're going to expand on that this year. So our 2022 plans include using our regional strategy as a tool to focus on bite-sized actionable goals that we can really achieve together. This picture right here is from that Tres Rios Nature Festival, and I felt like it was a great opportunity to get to know many of our partners in person who we've only been meeting virtually for the last 2 years because of the pandemic. So one step we've taken is to merge all of CASCA's invasive plant species groups. There was a couple of us. There was a group focused on mapping. There was a group focused on collaboration and education. And we're putting all of those groups together under the umbrella of the Desert Defenders name, since it's such a catchy title and it's a memorable logo. And so we can really use that to inspire action and bring more people into the fold of these efforts. Our partners in Desert Defenders also continue to map and remove, since of course this is the central goal of the group. We want to reduce invasive plants in natural areas and surrounding spaces, like I said on the previous slide. And so now we also want to reach out to similar collaboratives and working groups, such as the Southwest Vegetative Management Association and the Lower Gila Water Collaborative Group. These are groups that we've joined some of their meetings so that we can share what we're doing and find out what each other's goals and actions are going to be for the upcoming year, so we can leverage that. We're also planning additional field trips to share management practices within our working group. We're wanting to identify educational and outreach events that make sense for Desert Defenders to table at to reach the public. And we'd like to host a shared volunteer pull day somewhere that's very visible in the fall. That way we can get more people interested in learning about invasive species management and getting out there to help us with this project. So thank you so much for listening to our update on the invasive plant species work that we've been doing. There's a lot of passion and dedicated people who are working in this space. And if you want to join us or learn more, feel free to reach out to me and we're happy to get you involved. Thank you.
We have a couple interesting questions. I assume we have time for those.
Yes, we have time.
They both relate to external factors. One is the role of local plant nurseries in selling fountain grass. And the other one, and you may have noticed as you visit the preserve that there are invasive plants growing along access roads to the preserve. Is there any possibility that the city of Scottsdale will treat along those roadways or allow us to treat along those roadways? Because obviously they're shedding seeds into the preserve.
Okay. Do you want to go first, Paul?
I will take the last one, which is along the streets. A couple issues there. One, with the limited resources we have, to be honest, we keep ourselves mighty busy, as we described already, doing what we are doing within the preserve, which is our primary focus and our priority. If we had more resources, we might be able to get out there and help the city. It has been a frustration for all of us that the city does not seem to prioritize this issue as much as we have. I think many of you know that around the preserve boundary, primarily for fire mitigation purposes, the city has been trying to clear pathways around the edge of the preserve along the streets. And that has included the removal of invasive plants, but away from the preserve, that has not happened. They do have dedicated applicators who are capable of doing that, but for one reason or another, they have not prioritized that. As part of the effort that I did mention in terms of working more closely with the city, hopefully we can prompt them. It's not going to be the preserve staff, but they may be able to help get some action at the city level. So we will be working on that.
I'd like to add to that briefly. The working group that we have going with the city is looking at a grant that would help continue the removals in the preserve, but we're also working with their new wildland fire employee who's part of his job is to procure money to continue the the fire mitigation efforts around the preserve, and that does focus, in part on invasive species. So I do see this collaboration building that effort over time.
And another related aspect, the role of nurseries and gardeners in possibly continuing to propagate fountain grass.
So fountain grass is listed now on the noxious weed list. And so the variety that is invasive to preserves is in theory banned from all nurseries. And so it's not supposed to be sold. There are some cultivars that are out there being sold at nurseries. And Helen has actually shared with Paul and myself a really great document that distinguishes between the fountain grass that's invasive to the preserve and then potentially some cultivars that are hopefully not so. So yes, it's on the noxious weed list. It cannot be sold in nurseries. However, it has been planted in neighborhoods for years. So for instance, I live in Fountain Hills and I see fountain grass everywhere that's been planted for many years. So, there's the case that some has been sold in nurseries in prior years before it was on the noxious weed list. And I think that that's an area that we could work on and focus on to help homeowner associations and individual neighbors know that they might be contributing to this problem without knowing about it.
Another question concerning Casca, does it include Pima County and the invasive plant efforts down there?
Yes, so our group also includes folks who can join from Pima County. The Casca region, I think, generally focuses on folks who, most of the people who I work with are in Maricopa County, but there are some who are from Pima County and we don't want to exclude them. In our group, I think the majority of people who are working with us are in the Valley. So if they're in Pima County, maybe they're out by Apache Junction. But we have invited people to join our group from the Southwest Vegetative Management Association group, and a lot of folks are in Tucson who work with that group. So we're keeping in collaboration with people within the Central Arizona region, and that's what CASCA is really supposed to cover. It's not just Maricopa County, but the Central Arizona region.
Thank you. That takes care of the questions to this point.
Thank you, Doug.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mary.